YouTube, BitChute, also Facebook Live, and on the audio streams, as well as on 21stcenturywire.com. You can watch us live at 21 Wire on the show page. Hello to everybody in the 21st Century Wire chat room, and they'll be there afterwards. So whatever you miss live, it's always going to be there at our website. Just go to 21stcenturywire.com. Now, earlier in the week, during the midweek wire, we had a very fascinating and informative discussion with independent journalist, filmmaker, researcher Ryan Dawson. We're discussing the latest dump of files by the Trump administration, the JFK files. We're going through those and pointing out what we thought was really important, what people should be looking at, putting into perspective. It was a very, I think, productive session that we had, and we've had great feedback from that. And Ryan and I were discussing maybe we should continue this and talk about the RFK assassination, seeing that it's very topical at the moment. So we're going to bring Ryan Dawson back on the program for today's episode of the Sunday Wire to discuss the Robert F. Kennedy assassination. But we're also going to talk as well in the Overdrive session with Basil Valentine, who's going to be cleaning up, mopping up on the JFK issue. He's been surveying what a lot of the top researchers have been saying, their reactions. He's going to kind of condense that and aggregate a lot of that commentary and deliver it in the Overdrive segment. So we're looking forward to that discussion with our colleague Basil Valentine. So that's going to be excellent. So now let's get into the main topic. I want to bring on to the stage independent journalist, filmmaker, researcher Ryan Dawson, joining us on the live link right now. Ryan, thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks again for having me.
So as we were discussing the Robert F. Kennedy assassination, a lot of focus on JFK, on the file dump right now. And you've done extensive work on a lot of these major events, including this one. So a lot of people aren't aware about, I think a lot of Americans are aware. Maybe people who are younger, Ryan, aren't aware. So we're kind of red pilling a new generation as well through this. So yes, there were the JFK files that were released by the Trump administration. But this period in history, Ryan, where you had three major political national figures, John F. Kennedy Jr. in the center, and then to his left, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., his brother, who was also his attorney general, and then to the right of JFK is Martin Luther King Jr. All three of these figures were assassinated in a very short space of time. This had a very traumatic effect on the United States, the political scene. I think the spirit of the nation was in some ways damaged and traumatized by these events. So Ryan, that's why it's important that we delve into it. And one of the productive parts, I think, of our last discussion, Ryan, was we need to kind of also look at these events and separate them. You've got the who and how, like who was the shooter, how was the assassination carried out. That's important from a forensic point of view and trying to debunk the official story or the media narrative, as it were. But there's also the why and motivation, and that's equally, if not more important. So we did get some great, I think, clues and indications on the JFK files, and generally in your film, which we'll show, which we're featuring on the Sunday Wire this week, which is called NUMEC. And you can look at that film. It's also free on Rumble. We'll pull that up on the screen right now. How Israel Stole the Bomb and Killed JFK, NUMEC. This is a film by Ryan Dawson, a great independent documentary film that's up at the Sunday screening up at 21st Century Wire.
And they got it too. The year after he died, they got the bomb. They got everything from Angleton.
Yeah, this is why it's still relevant today, because it had has a profound effect on the relationship in the foreign policy, the domestic policy of the U.S. And everything.
Only twice in history are they giving memorial services in Israel to foreigners, and one was James Angleton, where the heads of Shin Bet and the Mossad and the former heads of Shin Bet and Mossad are all at a memorial service, and then they named a forest after him. Why? This is a guy in counterintelligence of the CIA. He lives in America, and he's got this giant memorial service from all the intelligence heads of Israel. And the other time that happened was Robert Maxwell. You all know what he did. That
Interesting.
also relates to the nuclear program because he was the one who entrapped Mordecai Vanunu, was the whistleblower on the Israeli warheads.
Robert Maxwell, there's a name that's also connected with a scandal.
His daughter is a convicted pedophile and human trafficker. Yeah.
Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of Israeli super spy Robert Maxwell. So James Jesus Angleton in good company there. But just quickly before we go on to the assassination of RFK, Ryan, just kind of sketch out the political scene of the 1960s and the significance of these three assassinations happening in succession. Your opinion, how do you think that affected?
Yeah, so the main, we have the civil rights era going on. You've got the Vietnam War going on, which is, of course, accompanied with a very unpopular draft. Be drafted in the service and sit to Vietnam. And so MLK and RFK were hot on those issues too. And obviously, John Kennedy made the mistake of sending the advisors to Vietnam, but there were a lot of different factions that hated the Kennedys for different reasons. And of course, you had the Cuban Missile Crisis under John Kennedy, the ongoing Cold War, very serious threat with the Soviet Union and the United States, jockeying for position and trying to grab influence in different countries, which it affects the black market arms trade and narcotics trade, because they use that to pay for the arms trade all over the world. So you have a complex system. And this is when the CIA is kind of at its peak of really working with and managing criminals, including domestically in the United States. They had liaisons, people like Jack Ruby and David Ferry, with the organized crime inside the United States to undermine different markets and have influence. And that included with Cuba, which is important in both assassinations, but I don't want to get too deep into JFK because we'll be here forever. I think, like you said, if you segregate it, like we could come back and do a show on MLK too, but just talk about Robert Kennedy. His son is in Trump's cabinet. The story is less complicated, more clean, you can sum it up pretty fast. And then you can plug in that puzzle piece into John's death because it all fits together. He was killed on the anniversary of the 6-Day War. I mean, barely right after midnight on June 6th, June 5th, where he was shot in the back 3 times by a rent-a-cop.
What's interesting about this, just from a casual, observer here, a lay person, the public, any video I watch about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's got this at the bottom. Immediately, I'll bring this on screen. A Wikipedia note basically reiterating that he was killed by a lone gunman, Sirhan, at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, California on June 5th, 1968. So Wikipedia, the establishment, if you will, Ryan, constantly reiterating, constantly reminding billions of viewers who are logging into the internet at every move. There's this reinforcement of this official story. So that's kind of like,
who edits Wikipedia? Like the Israeli state pays people to edit Wikipedia. I believe Al Jazeera did a doco on that.
This is true. Yeah, Naftali Bennett as well. The video is doing the rounds on the internet, basically saying he's got a troll farm that looks after Israeli narratives and interests on Wikipedia. So that's, again, another one that's not a.
I guess we should tell the official story, like, or the Hollywood version, whatever, is a Palestinian Christian. Already, it's a Palestinian Christian, Sirhan Bashir Sirhan, just popped out of the kitchen, totally by chance, knew Kennedy would be going that route, and somehow fired an 8-shot revolver that held 8 bullets 13 times in front of Kennedy and hit him 3 times in the back and hit 5 other people, including people that were behind Sirhan. That's actually not the official story. The official story is Sirhan shot them all by himself and there was only 8 shots. But that doesn't fit with the physical evidence.
So here's just a little primer. We'll bring this up and obviously we'll comment on this, and we'll get into some of the material you've shared with us before the show, Ryan. But this is CBS kind of newsreel here. I think it was CBS Boston that put this together.
Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles, on June 5th, 1968, headquarters for the Robert Kennedy for President campaign. Victorious in the crucial California primary, Kennedy addresses an enthusiastic crowd in one of the hotel's ballrooms.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
As he turned and went by me, he turned to the right toward the kitchen.
When he did come through, lots of television cameras and stuff, and we were going into a press conference.
He was shaking hands with the two busboys, talking with them, and it was at that time that the shots started.
Major D reported that Senator Kennedy had been shot.
He's been shot?
That's right.
I just heard this crackling noise and was shaking violently, and I thought I was being electrocuted. That was my impression.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible? Is that possible?
I saw him laying on the ground. I knew that he wasn't going to live.
Everybody else, just please stay back. Just a doctor, come right here.
25 and a half hours after he is shot at 1:44 a.m. on June 6, Robert Kennedy dies. Immediately following the shooting, there is little doubt in anyone's mind that 24-year-old Sirhan B. Sirhan, using an 8-shot, .22 caliber revolver, was the one who killed Kennedy and wounded 5 others. There were 77 people in the pantry that night, witnesses. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. An open and shut case. Or was it? Greg Stone has spent over a decade looking into the Kennedy assassination. He is one of a number calling for a reinvestigation of the case. A call based on seeming inconsistencies in the physical evidence and on a belief that the original investigation is flawed. A belief that is remarkably shared by former LAPD Sergeant Paul Shiraga, the first police officer on the scene the night of the shooting. When asked if he thinks there has been a cover-up inside the LAPD,
I would have to come to that conclusion.
If there is a cover-up, the question is why? To hide a conspiracy or to conceal slipshod police work? Who really shot Bobby? A much simpler question 20 years ago.
And I don't accept the idea that the stain of bloodshed is going to be ever across our country.
There it is, Ryan. That's there have been questions out in even the mainstream public domain, and even his son, who's currently in the Trump administration, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., has also expressed skepticism, doesn't believe the official story. So your thoughts generally on where the story is right now?
It's telling that you use a clip from CBS because the CBS news anchor was in the kitchen pantry when it happened and saw Gene Caesar pull his gun out, and he thought he was firing back at Sirhan. He said, Kennedy's bodyguard fired back. Kennedy's got it. Yeah. Well, he wasn't really a bodyguard. He was there as an assassin. He did fire his gun, but it wasn't firing back at Sirhan. He was firing into Robert, and it wasn't an accident. Let me tell you why. Like, Sirhan was there, and he had a gun. He's guilty. He's in jail where he belongs. But he was sort of forced hand. He was in debt. He was threatened, and I'll get into his background in a second. But going over the physical evidence first. The first problem is there's too many shots. He's got an 8-shot revolver. You've got 5 bystanders hit. You've got Kennedy hit twice, and you've got a hole through his jacket. And then there's more bullets. There's the gun, by the way. There's more bullets in the door frame and another one near like a door jammer. And in 1976, there was a Freedom of Information Act request that actually got photographs of them photographing the holes and showing them. And we have witnesses from both the FBI and citizens who were there who saw these things. And so I don't know if you have a photograph of the door frame. They actually circled the holes. Now, it's telling because this came from a FOIA request in 76. He shot in 68. I'll tell you what happened was the Zapruder film had just been released, and that reinvigorated an interest in both of the Kennedy assassinations, because that's the first time people saw the motorcade shooting. Before that, there were still pictures that were in Time Life magazine, but never the video. It wasn't until after C.D. Jackson died that they released the video. And when people saw that, that's when you had the House Select Committee on Assassinations come in on a second investigation to do better than the Warren Commission. And then you had a reinvigorated interest in Robert's death as well. And the FOIAs do come out and show the bullet holes.
So tell us what we're
There
looking
you
at
can
here.
see, I believe that's Thomas Noguchi. He's one of the coroner, Japanese American. And you see two clean holes right there, around chest high on a regular sized man. It's quite high, high up. Of course, is the one that missed. Thane is shooting right behind him, like he's holding his arm and shot him, bop, bop, bop. And those went through. Then, in addition to that, you have witnesses, and I can tell you, Angelo DePiro and Martin Petruski both claimed that they saw bullet holes and a bullet still in the door frame. But more telling than that was an FBI agent who was on the scene. He was there on June 5th. His name is William Bailey. And William Bailey got a very close look, and he saw both holes and two bullets in the holes from the FBI. And he said as much to the LA County Supervisor, Baxter Ward. So Baxter Ward can back up what William Bailey said. And then you have these other witnesses that were there, Petruski and DePiro. Two more holes, two more bullets. Also in that FOIA request, you can see another shot lower. Oh, there, yeah, see, they even labeled them. Lower on the ground near the door jamb. And you can see a policeman with a flashlight, and it looks like they have a screwdriver or a pencil or something poking in the hole, showing, yeah, here's another bullet hole. Now, all of this physical evidence got destroyed. In fact, they tore down the whole hotel. But we do have these photographs. And so they did find holes in bullets. And that's not random. This is a nice hotel. They don't just have holes in the kitchen, okay? Yep, there's the one on the lower. So, and some of these shots are where Sirhan was standing. So Sirhan would be, if he's firing toward Kennedy, instead of just firing sideways and backwards and stuff, then all the shots should be on that side of the room, but they're not. Some are on that side of the room, or they're in people who are on that side of the room, and some are on the opposite side of the room. So you've got a gun firing this way and a gun firing that way. And that is exactly what bears out with the witnesses too.
Yeah. Here's another, what are we looking at with this image here, Ryan?
Okay. And so then you have the coroner evidence. So this is more forensic evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Noguchi did the autopsy and finds powder burn marks on Kennedy's body, right below his right ear. And you can't, so when you fire a gun, if you've ever seen a gun fired, a real gun, not like Hollywood, a little flame briefly comes out of the barrel as the bullet's exiting. You can burn some of that. And so, but you have to have it up on them or like an inch away for that to affect you. And that happened twice. Because he got shot in the like neck, kind of upper neck, and then behind the right ear. And then he had a hole through his like lapel or his shoulder pad or whatever. So somebody just went like that, close enough to both leave a burn mark on his head, and chemical testing on the jacket proved. I want to point out too that the powder burns, it actually puts out a little bit of gunpowder, then the flame, then the bullet. He's got both. He's seared from the heat and he has powder burns. You don't get that from a distance from a bullet. You can't. How close the gun was, gunpowder, not just a bullet went through. If you're having gunpowder, they had to basically be touching you with the gun or be, an inch away or less. Many witnesses continued to hear gunfire after Sirhan was on the floor and subdued. And one of them was a colleague of yours, a very famous documentarian, John Pilger.
So, Ryan, this obviously an important character here, Thane Eugene Caesar. Just explain, who he is, just to be clear, and his role in the RFK assassination.
He is the private security guard that was right behind Kennedy, who was in a position to shoot him, who was witness firing his gun, and who would match the forensic evidence of powder burns on the head and the chemical residue through the jacket. He was the only person close enough firing a gun to Kennedy to have done that. And he's all mobbed up, arrested in Tijuana multiple times, worked for John Alessio. He's a total thug. and that is who was right behind him. And Kennedy actually pulled his tie off as he was dying. You can see it next to him on the floor. His clip-on is right there next to him.
Yeah, we'll bring that the image. I think we have that image of the tie.
So there you can see how narrow it was. There's the tie. Yes. Yep.
That's it. So RFK had pulled that off of the neck of Thane Eugene Caesar. Does that indicate that RFK knew that he was the shooter?
Well, I mean, as you're being shot and you just grab onto whatever, it's hard to know, but it's telling that it's obvious that Gene Caesar shot him, and he did at least pull his tie off.
So this is well, let's just go through a couple
I
of
believe
these.
that's Carl Ecker kneeling in front of him, who was the only person. He was between Kennedy and Sirhan, so there's a whole body length of a human being between the two of them. Before, yeah. Look at the picture of Sirhan. His eyes are like Charles Manson or something, where they wanted to make it seem like this guy's a nut. So if he said anything in court, it's just whatever, he's crazy. And they had a notebook where he had written, RFK must be killed, RFK must die, over and over and over again. RFK must be assassinated. And that is what I call Hollywood's idea of how crazy people behave. You know, they get a notebook and write the same sentence over and over and over again. That was planted. They find it where he worked at the Corona breeding farm, where he worked for Frank Donaramus. Like anyone with a deep understanding of the mob, especially in California, will recognize all these names. I do want to show something to make it clear, a little easier to understand. If we can make this big.
Sure. Yeah, go
so
ahead.
There's this square in the embassy room is the podium where he gave the speech, and then they go up into this pantry area. That's the picture you saw. Thane and Robert are about here, and on the other side is where, on here and down a little bit, that's where John Pilger and some bystanders were, and that's where Sirhan was. So Sirhan is firing that way, but people are hit on this side of the room, and people are also hit on this side of the room. But why do you have bullets going over here at all? And that's where your colleague John Pilger and another bystander who was actually grazed by a bullet were standing while Sirhan was already on the ground. And that dovetails with other witnesses who heard shots being fired while Sirhan was already on the ground. Then, like, Sirhan's on the ground, then pop, 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 then Kennedy falls. And they all remember when Kennedy fell, because that was the big, oh, Robert's on the ground. So Caesar was shooting him after Sirhan was already on the ground. But because Sirhan fired first, everyone's looking at him and they tackle him, they push him over the table. And then some people still saw the flashes. One of them being Don Schumann, as I said, he saw them pull out. He thought his bodyguard was firing back at Sirhan. Another one would be Miss Hughes. We'll get to the eyewitnesses in a moment, but I'd like you to, if you have the Pilger clip, because this is one of the most reliable journalists to ever do the job. And he is explaining exactly what he saw and heard. And this is a trained eye who was there. And he's on the side of the room where Sirhan was standing, way in front of Kennedy, not behind him.
So here's John Pilger. This is the audio that you supplied us. Ryan, listen to this.
Author, documentary maker, and journalist John Pilger gives his first-hand account as he was an eyewitness to the Robert Kennedy assassination.
There's no question that there was another gunman, because one of the people who was hit, just grazed, was standing next to me, and that happened when Sirhan had been wrestled to the ground. So that's the interesting thing. There was another assassin, or several assassins.
Amazing itself that of all people, John Pilger was there.
That bullet could have hit him. That's he's there. I know you knew him. I'm glad I have that. That's from an older film I made on a timeline of CIA greatest hits. It's a sardonic title, but he's like, there's no question there was another gunman or series of gunmen. because they're still firing after Sirhan's on the ground, and they're firing in the direction of Sirhan. So that's it. And that dovetails with other witnesses too. So you see Nina Rhodes Hughes, who's a witness, and her testimony is important. Yep, that's her on the left. You see the dark hair. She said, I heard 12 to 14 shots. She maintained that her whole life. She could be wrong in that she's just going on memory, hearing the pop, 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 pop pattern. Although we did find a recording of it, but she thinks it's 12 to 14 shots. And she reports that it's 12 to 14 shots. And they changed her testimony and said she said 8 shots because it can't be more than 8. His gun only holds 8 bullets. But that's not what she said. And she's like, I never said it was 8 shots. I know I said 12 to 14. I'm still saying, I've said that to everybody who's ever asked me about it. And so that shows LAPD complicity, because why wouldn't you just say what she thinks is 12 and she's wrong? They didn't do that. She said it was 8. They didn't want any doubt of, that Sirhan did it and he did it all by himself and there's only one gunman. And it was really silly for them to do, because they should have just said, yeah, she's just misremembering. And they'd be told, you can't prove based on memory that, oh, that's how many shots there were. But it was hard to tell the shots after about the 10th shot, the crowd starts screaming and reacting to where you couldn't cleanly know. But around 2011 or so, where they had the software that could isolate and wipe out white noise and all that, you did have others go through and forensically look at it. And they also concluded that there were 13 shots minimal. Yeah. And I have a clip of some of the audio engineers talking about that as well.
Tell us what we're looking at here, Ryan, this exhibit.
Oh, so this is some more evidence too. So that ring around a bullet, it's called a cannler. And when you have a clip full of bullets, they all have the same cannler. They have 1 ring or 2 ring or 3 ring or whatever it is. Their uniform is what grips where you load them in the gun. Now with a revolver, you can just slide them in anyway, but they'd still be uniform because that's how you buy them. And they did not have matching cannlers. And this is just extra evidence. So in addition to the powder burn marks on his head and in the jacket, a bullet that was pulled out of Kennedy's neck. And this was by Dwayne Wolfer. He's an LA police examiner, excuse me. And he pulled it out of the one out of Kennedy's body and noticed that the rings did not match one that was pulled out of a man named Woody Wiesel, who was shot in the stomach. He had a different firing angle, first off, but different cannlers as well. This man named Herbert McDonald noticed that the one in Wiesel had 2 rings and the one in Robert Kennedy only had 1 ring. And so you had that combined thing. So you've got ballistic tests from William Harper. You've got Dwayne Wolfer, the police examiner. You've got the coroner from Thomas Oguchi. You've got Herbert McDonald looking at the rings. So they're looking at the firing angle. They're doing the ballistics tests on the powder burns and things. They're looking at the body. And all the physical evidence shows at least 2 gunmen. And it also, more importantly, shows too many shots and a shot from an inch away. Yep, and there's another example of the bullets. That one is 1. The other looks like it has 4. Now, you can load random bullets in a gun, but usually that's not how it goes.
Yep. So
and again, that's just, I don't rest my argument on that. It's just another little extra thing on top of all the other things I just said.
I think one other item on this set of images here we'll come up to in a second.
I believe there's one showing X's on the floor of where they were positioned, which is obviously more than an inch away. So, anything more than 8 shots is already a second gun or second gunman. And Sirhan only had 1 gun. He wasn't Yosemite Sam and pap or anything. And they weren't ricocheting around. They're just a 22. So That's all. And Thane had a 22 9-shot revolver, I believe.
So tell us about, did anybody try to recover the gun of Thane Eugene Caesar?
Yes, they interviewed him. He screwed up every interview he ever did. And he admitted he had a 36, but they said, we know you have a 22 because you're a cop. Like, you all have them. Yeah, what'd you do with it? Oh, I sold it 3 months ago. And they believed him. Oh, who'd you sell it to? And they got the receipt. And the receipt says September 6th, 1968. There it is, handwritten, which is 3 months after the killing, not 3 months before.
So his alibi, as it were, is easily debunked, basically.
He really wasn't trying to hide it. He was kind of like, yeah, like he would do these ridiculous shows. Yeah, I had my gun out. Yeah, I had it. He's kind of one of these thugs. Yeah, I want a knuckle sandwich. He's just this low-level punk that sort of wanted people to know he killed Kennedy because he was getting away with it. They were putting Sirhan away, all the papers. He had all the protection of the mob and the LAPD, and nothing was going to happen to him. So he got a little bit sloppy with that receipt. Oh, whoops, it says September. Yeah, I meant April or whatever. No. So yeah, they have the gun. That's the trophy. So they have the receipt for the gun. The gun ends up in like a lake in Arkansas. That doesn't matter, but like they used to have the gun. That's gone. So but there he was. He was in a position to shoot him. He's right behind him, and it matches all the physical evidence.
So Ryan, just on the basic ballistics,
mm-hmm.
The official story fails immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't even need to be a professional forensic pathologist or a CSI investigator to work out that, right?
That FOIA request from 76 does it. Like, even if the door jam, forget it. The 2 holes in the door frame, plus 5 people being hit, plus Kennedy being hit twice, plus a hole through his jacket, you already have too many bullets. And then you got one in the ceiling. It's 13 shots or more. There could be a bullet they never found, I suppose, but you have more than 8 shots. And the distance is wrong. You cannot get powder burns on the back of someone's head unless you are touching them with the gun. And every single witness said Sirhan was, feet away, not right up on him. And every witness has Thane was hugging him like a human shield. He had him by the elbow and kind of led him in the room, like right up on his back, because he knows Sirhan's about to pop out. And once Sirhan was down, he pulled out, pop, pop, pop. These art, they're misleading with the drawings. Like,
yeah, this is just some of the collateral mainstream material here. There's Robert F. Kennedy on the ground. So chaotic scene, a lot of people in the room, and it is very telling, Ryan, as you mentioned in your analysis, that the House Select Committee on Assassinations, that report was finally released in 1979 or something like that. But it was around or after that time that a lot of people start turning up dead or people getting knocked off. I mean, that's what the implication is. What's your thought on what was going on at that time?
Well, even before that, you had witnesses getting harassed and researchers getting harassed. You had the LA district attorney he thought there was a second shooter. He said something along the lines of, the time of counting shots is over. We need to be looking at the firing squad. So some of them thought not just Thane, but like 2 more people. And Pilger sort of thought there could have been more than Thane too, but 1 more is enough. I mean, Thane Caesar was a shooter. He's there, witness firing his gun, and it matches the forensic evidence. But if you talk about witnesses being harassed, that happened right away. You had, first off, William Harper, who in 1971, he had, right, like the day before his testimony, some guys drove around in a Buick and shot the back of his car. So they're shooting at his car. You had Walt Emerson, who was a researcher and kind of financing research too. He got death threats on the phone. Theodore Chirac got assaulted with a gun. They pistol whipped him. and his secretary, Betty Dreyer, was knifed. And I'll promise you, Sirhan's in jail. Sirhan is not running around shooting cars and knifing women and pistol whipping people or threatening people on the phone or any of that stuff. And a lot of that happened around 1971. So this is before the House Select Committee concludes anything. But they did not like these people probing into the death at all. And also Thomas Noguchi got fired. He got reinstated because this attorney named Godfrey Isaac did a really good job and got a job back. But he kind of learned, okay, keep my mouth shut, because he had already lost his job. But he's the one saying about the powder burns and everything. They're like, you can't say that.
Just
the mob was not worried about the LAPD, but they didn't control the coroner and they couldn't control everything, but they could control how it got reported.
Here's an interesting story as well. Just speaking of that, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had weighed in on this. This was, I think, in 2018. Pittsburgh Dr. Cyril Wecht applauds RFK Jr.'s call to reinvestigate father's assassination. And this is the forensic pathologist from the former Allegheny County coroner, Dr. Cyril Wecht, has long held the belief that there was a second gunman who fatally shot his father, RFK Sr., in Los Angeles then. So Thane retired to the Philippines. So he never was investigated. He didn't do any time. He got off pretty much scot-free.
Yeah, he had a nice life. They took care of him. And, the people around him, because Hoffa had a contract killing on RFK, him and Carmine Galante put that together. And, by December, when Nixon gets in 71, he gets Hoffa out of jail. It was part of the package. And so there's the story that I find more interesting is getting Thane Caesar to shoot RFK it doesn't really go anywhere unless you know what a security was and who was around him, who paid for it. The talk of contract killings before the death that was discussed. They have an in-jail witness hearing them discuss it. That doesn't prove anything by itself, because of course the mob is going to talk about killing Kennedy. They'd like to kill a lot of people. That doesn't mean they did it. But when you put it all together, like, for example, look at Sirhan's lawyers. Grant Cooper is his lawyer and co-counseled by Russell Parsons. And this is an absolute joke if you know who these people are. And these, Grant, it was so bad because he was also defending 4 co-defendants in the Friars Casino case of Johnny Roselli, total mafia involved with his brother's death. And this is the kind of person that just happens to be representing Sirhan. What a coincidence. He's not there to defend Sirhan. He's there to limit the investigation to only Sirhan and make sure Sirhan doesn't run his mouth. That's where and the fact that Sirhan is working for Frank Donaramus at the Corona breeding farm, which was a gambling, they do horse racing and dog racing and all kinds of legal things. They were providing the Santa Ana racetrack, and all these things are mobbed up. But yeah, and then Roselli himself, Johnny Roselli, was murdered before he could talk to the House Select Committee on Assassinations for his third testimony. They murdered him and put his body in a drum and dumped it in a lake in Florida. It's surprising. I think a fisherman or somebody found it, but usually that would have been a Hoffa-styled appearance where you never found the body, but they did. They found him in a drum. But that was a really strong signal telling everybody, shut your mouth, don't talk to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. But here's the best part about Cooper. This is 1969, okay, because the trial takes a while. He was in possession of unauthorized secret grand jury testimony, because why not, right? This is how you harass witnesses and things. And so he had to get pulled off because of that. And so Russell Parsons, the co-counsel, takes over. And this is a man who also had his whole career as a mafia lawyer defending them. And he had actually been investigated over his mafia connections by the chief counsel of the Senate Racket Committee, which was, as you know, Robert Kennedy. The man that Robert Kennedy had been investigating is defending Sirhan as his co-counsel after the lead counsel had to be taken off for having illegal tampering with the jury and testimony, jury grand testimony. It's comical how bad and crooked the whole thing is. And then you look at Sirhan, $28,000 in debt and working for people of the same syndicate. So, that never sees the light of day for some reason, but that's what you have going on. And, oh, by the way, Parsons, the co-counsel who was being investigated by RFK, that defended Sirhan also wrote a reference letter for a very famous mobster who hated the Kennedys named Mickey Cohen. He tried to get him leniency in Cleveland. Mickey Cohen was in jail at the time of the assassination, but Mickey Cohen was a huge financier of not only Irgun terrorist organization, but Westgate, California, which this is a little bit complicated, but the people that ran a security that hired Thane was the U.S. Bank, National Bank of San Diego. And it's run by this guy named Arnold Smith, who becomes a Nixon guy. But by 60, so, before the Kennedys were shot, he combined his holdings with John Alessio, mobster from New Jersey, and they owned this conglomerate called West Bank, California. And West Bank, California was in everything, but they were getting no interest loans from the U.S. National Bank of San Diego. So it's called, in Japanese, called that a zaibatsu, where you have a company that gets privileged loans because they own the bank, they own the company. And so they would get into like the yellow cab industry, tuna packing. They was pretty diversified, but they had the advantage of that. And they're also doing loan sharking and helping finance illegal operations for the mob. One of those was a John Alessio outfit. What he had, these racetracks, like I mentioned, and Sirhan's working at one of them, where he's working at the place that provides the horses, but whatever. What he would do is he had a dog and race track in San Diego, and he had others in Mexico. It's illegal to gamble on racing in the United States, but it's not illegal to make bets in Mexico. So he would just process bets on U.S. races in Mexico and then use the bank to launder the money and blah, blah, blah. And he is had the controlling shares and was the director, so like the president of Westgate, California, was Smith. And Alessio is 100% in the mob. Like, he knew Dalitz, Cohen, all the famous ones, everybody knows these people. And in fact, Mickey Cohen, previously, before he got arrested and hit in the head with a pipe, was running a gambling operation out of the Ambassador Hotel where he was shot. So they had a great relationship. William Gardner, who ran the hotel security, those guys, by the way, didn't have any guns. They're just wearing the guys you see with the brown, like, police suits. They don't have weapons, but they're just like push people out of the way and stuff. A security came loaded. And that's where another thing about Thane. Who do you think was guarding the door to the pantry during the speech? He was. Yeah. So he let Sirhan in. Like, it's just bad. Anyway, so looking at Sirhan's lawyer, how did he pay for Grant Cooper and Parsons? That he's in debt. He's 24 years old. How does he get these crack lawyers that are defending Johnny Roselli and the Friars Club case? Like, how did that happen? Who paid for that? And then you look at the people that wanted him dead the most, and the fact that they get half out of prison. It's really disgusting. The thing is, if you didn't already know a lot about the mob, these names wouldn't mean anything. Oh, this lawyer's name is Cooper. Okay. But if you know about what was going on in that area, then the pieces start coming together really quickly. And a note to what you said about him investigating his brother's death. In fact, on May 28th, so this is a week before, a week and a day, before, he spent 2 hours in Oxnard, California, checking out a lead he'd gotten from Jim Garrison, and he was looking into his brother's death. And RFK verbalized to aides and things that he thought Hoffa could have had a role in murdering his brother. That's what he believed. So he was looking into that angle. And of course, I spoke earlier about Carmine Galante and Hoffa saying they have a contract killing, that their Kennedy is just going to, when John died, they said, haha, Robert's just now another lawyer. And then they wanted to get rid of him because he was going to become president after he won the primaries in California, most likely. But yep, there he was. And they're discussing this, and Hoffa was sprung from prison shortly after. But it was funny that Hoffa had a very famous Californian field director, Murray Chuntier, who he campaigned for a very famous person that ran for governor of California. I think you know his name, and that was Earl Warren
of Warren Commission fame,
head of the Warren Commission. They're working for Earl Warren. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's all how it all connects and converges, Ryan, with the mafia, Sirhan, the Ambassador Hotel. You've got the LA mob with Mickey Cohen. You've got the Chicago mob with Roselli. And also this is something I found, which you might
kind of the San Diego / LA mob with Donna Ramos and Alessio too.
Yeah. Del Mar Racetrack, Jimmy Durante. It's like,
yeah.
He
worked there too. He worked at Del Rey before he went to Corona Breeding Farm. I didn't say that, did I? But that
no.
Could have.
So here's an article I pulled from the CIA's reading room, Ryan, here, and it's talking about Santos Trafficante. He was a big Florida mob figure as well, and connected here with the Roselli situation. So I mean, explain how that.
Well, he had him taken out because Santos Trafficante, as he was the mob boss of Tampa Bay, he had been arrested when Batista was out and Castro took charge. He was held in a detention center. Guess who went to visit Trafficante in Cuba? And they ended up getting him out of jail or out of the detention center. Guess who flew from Miami to Cuba to meet with Trafficante, who prior to that had a gun running operation legally, because we have an Army intelligence memo showing that he was allowed to trade U.S. arms. Very famous person named Leon Jacob Rubenstein. The Jack Ruby was visiting the mob boss. It was because what happened was the mob had all these casinos and hotels in Cuba. And Batista just let them do it, probably $1 billion. And Castro came in, arrested a bunch of people, and shut it all down. Not all of it, because he eventually, with Jake Lansky and Meyer Lansky and Santos Trafficante, somehow got a deal. And that is because of this guy named McNone in Texas, and it doesn't matter, it's a big story. But anyway, Jacob Rubenstein, who shot Oswald, was doing illegal gun running to Cuba and was working with this faction with Trafficante. Roselli knows what Trafficante and Marcelo did. He knows their role in killing JFK. And they know that he knows. So they made him shut up because he was in trouble in the Friars Club case. So he's thinking, I'll plea bargain, I'll say this, I'll say that. He wants to stay out of jail. They go, no, you're going to end up in a drum in Florida. And Sam Giancana, who was a wheelman, they shot him in the mouth for talking. So that's how they clean that up. And I have all the documents on this. I didn't bring the JFK with me, but yep. Another interesting thing that Ruby knew was George White, who worked in the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. They shorten the name now, but George White was the head of MK Ultra, and he used to go pick up Trafficante at the airport and ride with him and Ruby back and forth to Miami and stuff. They all knew each other, and they're going to act like, and this is very important because this came out officially now. Angleton, had surveillance on Oswald for years. They act like they didn't know him, that he wasn't in the government or anything, and that's just not true. He was in the YouTube spy program in Japan with Ferry, Civil Air Patrol. They're at pictures at barbecues together and stuff. They all knew each other. He knew Bannister, he knew Shaw. They lied about Oswald. And now we know that we knew, but like now it's admitted that Angleton had eyes on. He had more than eyes on. They were running him, but they at least admit that they had eyes on Oswald. And of course, Oswald and Ferry knew each other. Oswald knew all these characters. Ruby knew him. They knew Officer Tippett too, who was also murdered. I'm trying not to get stuck on Kennedy, but but this is how the Robert Kennedy assassination relates to the same players that are involved in the cover-up and the triangulation shooting of JFK. And that's a big background, I know, with the Marcello brothers and That's another guy, Carlos Marcello, not Joe, but the younger one, was got sent to a trip to Guatemala by RFK. Found in his immigration records or something, and made him have to go down there. I mean, he just came back, but he had to go down to Guatemala. They didn't like him. They really wanted him out.
And Roselli, this is from the reporting here that I pulled up from the CIA reading room. According to the police, 70-year-old Roselli was strangled and his legs were sawed off so the body would fit into a metal drum. The murderers cut holes in the drum so it would fill with water and weighed it down with heavy chains. Okay. Then it was heaved into Miami's Biscayne Bay. But apparently the gases from the body in the drum caused it to rise eerily from its saltwater grave. The drum with its grisly contents washed up on the shore. So that's how they found out about Roselli. Otherwise,
he would have just disappeared.
Would have been just disappeared. So,
and the goal was to make him disappear because it's actually more scary with the witnesses going to talk to the House Select Committee on Assassination and then they just disappear and nobody knows what happened to them and everyone assumes they're dead. That's more frightening than if you find them shot on the floor or something, because it's like, wow, they just made him disappear. And they almost made him disappear, but brackish water isn't like the salt water they usually dumped him into in New Jersey, I guess. So the drum floated up and I think a fisherman found it or somebody, but they found the drum and washed up. That happened again in the 80s, someone else, where they did the same thing, put the holes in, it just washed up. Imagine finding a drum with a body in a state of decay. Like, there are people who have to study that. There's called the Body Farm in Tennessee, where they do ridiculous stuff like just leave a corpse in the back of a car and see at certain heats. And what a horrible job! But
for forensic pathology, for that.
Yeah.
So Ryan, just to pull that together. So, and again, this gets back to our original point when we started this discussion.
This is why Sirhan keeps his mouth shut. This is the kind of people he's dealing with. They will wipe out your whole family. Yeah.
So we have the mob. We have the mob. It's clear. There's no debate. The evidence, the preponderance of evidence is overwhelming. Not just that, the physical, the forensic evidence, the connections, all of that.
Lawyers, yeah.
So now's the question. So we know the who, we know the how, but what about the why? And you did allude to some clues there with the mob. Is there a through line?
Why a Palestinian patsy who has a newspaper in his back pocket that talks about Israel and Palestine? The Italian mob doesn't care about Palestine.
Exactly. What is that? Is that the clue as to why and the motivation, Ryan? Is there a through line to JFK?
It was really stupid for them to do that. They could have just, I mean, it doesn't need to be a Palestinian Christian, but that's what, that's who they set up. And he was drugged out of his mind and can't remember it. I mean, they just sent him there out of a taxi into the kitchen, whatever. But this is how they are. I mean, it's kind of like the anthrax letters in 9/11. They wrote death to America, death to Israel. I mean, they just can't help themselves. It's kind of like the 40 beheaded babies. It doesn't matter how ridiculous it is. That's what they went with, because they wanted the sympathy. They wanted to blame a Palestinian for killing Camelot, killing Kennedy again, and again, another Kennedy dead. And it was this rotten Palestinian. That's what who did it. And so it would make you side with Israel. And what's really disgusting about that is Kennedy, Robert Kennedy at least, supported right of return. He had supported Algerian independence the whole time. He supported registering the American Zionist Council under the FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act, which would That's AIPAC today. There'd be no AIPAC. There'd be no UDP. They know none of that. None of those would exist. They'd have to register for an agent. They'd lose their power. And of course, he'd supported investigating Dimona because it was Robert Kennedy. If you've seen the film, well, I know you've seen the film, but for the audience, if you've seen the film, it was, Carl Duckett and Hayden and the guys working for him are the ones who physically went out and tested flora and fauna around Dimona and found the 97% enriched uranium, proving they'd stolen it from the United States. Robert Kennedy knew all those things, but he couldn't really act on those things unless he became president. Because Johnson sure as hell wasn't going to act on him. Johnson was totally compromised, total Zionist. He gave us the USS Liberty. That's why the biggest reason, though, wasn't his positions on Israel as much as it was him investigating his brother's death, because that would really make everything fall apart.
Mm. Right. So there's a couple of so you've drawn a through line from RFK's assassination to JFK, right there.
Yeah. The same people who get rid of him were involved in plots to kill JFK, but they didn't have the means. That's why when they're saying, "Oh, we got new Jewish backers and stuff," when they say Jews, they mean Israel. It's not the Jews, obviously. It's not the Italians. It's gangs, and but that's how they refer to themselves. That's how I say it. But you know what I mean. They knew Ben Gurion and his faction working through Angleton. They just recycled assassination plots on Fidel and used them on JFK, and they were all set up in Daley Plaza, and everybody knows what happened there. And you have a guest that's about to talk about that, so I won't steal his thunder. But it's the same people covering up, and a lot of the people who knew what had happened, because they all partied right after it happened. It was so disgusting. They had to make sure that they were not going to talk to these new committees. Someone like Roselli, he's in his 70s. Why not say something? So they made them take it to the grave. And a lot of witnesses and things disappear, or like Roger Craig got run off the road and they broke his back. Then somebody blew his head off with a shotgun. They said it was a suicide. It's very suspicious. The problem was, prior to the internet, in the paper age, it was very hard to put all these things together. And then even if you did, where do you go? Who do you talk to? Like, I've known this information for a lot with the internet, and I don't even know where to go. When you're talking about the CIA, like, you can't go to the CIA, you can't go to the FBI. So, and LAPD covered this up and destroyed evidence and sat on it. But oh my God, if you look at the LAPD now, look how bad it was in 1968. It was run by criminals. And, LA was a huge import of the illegal narcotics business from the South, that the mob was sort of the receiver side in that supply chain. Now the cartels, it got real professional with Barry Seal and all that during the Contra affair. But prior to that, when you're talking about Sammy Corona and Yarl Lorex and those kind, getting heroin from Honduras, for example, in New Orleans, the mob is the distributor. Once it comes into the city, they already have why would you make a network when you have a pre-existing one? So they start pushing that. And Lansky and some of these other people, they didn't like the drugs as much. They will move guns, they'll do gambling, they'll do the unions, they'll do all the normal white collar crime and stuff, but they didn't like how narcotics was affecting the community. Rather racist line was drawn in the New York mob that, like, okay, you can sell it, but only to the blacks and Latinos, not to the Italians. At least he had a line somewhere, but yeah, don't sell it in our own area. They didn't like it, but it didn't matter. It was so much revenue. And what happens is the shift goes south. All those southern cities that can import the drugs are the middlemen. So it becomes more profitable. And the outfit out of Chicago and New York, they'd already been moving west into Vegas and LA for the entertainment industry and the casinos, because it's legalized. They just moved their operation out of Cuba because they got kicked out of there and put it in Las Vegas. And then they start going south. And Dallas was contested territory. It wasn't like the boss of Dallas, clearly. And I guess you could argue the outfit ended up with it, but it wasn't easy. And but after killing Kennedy, Johnson comes in, and it's just ongoing nepotism where he would just put them all in the right position. And then it got even worse under Nixon. It actually got worse under Nixon. Nixon got hardcore assassins who had shot and poisoned people and all that out of jail. And he got Hoffa out of jail. It's just because, you know, Nixon's a Californian politician, and you really couldn't go anywhere in that state without paying your dues. And they had him. And he wasn't like in line with them ideologically or anything. He just needed their money and owed them favors, and they had dirt on him. So he did what they said to a degree. So they didn't completely run Nixon, but he could keep his promises to him. And that's why, so even after the Warren Commission, after all this, you have LBJ, you have Nixon, like it's not going anywhere. And then by the time you, and Ford wasn't any better either. So by the time you get to like Carter, let's say, he didn't even look at it. You're in the 80s, you know, like by the time you can get anything going. Then I guess that film in the early 90s called JFK sparked an interest, but they made it seem like, oh, the CIA was mad about the Bay of Pigs or something. They didn't mention Israel at all. They dismissed the mafia completely. That movie says, you think the mafia could cover up? Like there's only one sentence about the mob, and it's just to dismiss it as like, don't even look at this. It can't be them. And it's like, dude, the mafia is not separate from intelligence agencies any more than Al Qaeda or ISIS. They're not independent, never have been, not since the 20s.
It's intertwined, and that's a really important
on the upper level. Yeah,
so. Would you say, Ryan, the way you're describing this post JFK Washington, where all these different factions are competing, the narcotics are coming up, it's transforming the whole organized crime syndicates, putting pressure on parts of the cartels, and what would you say that's kind of like the height of corruption? Or in
the golden age for the mob? What happens later is they kind of legitimize, because USAID and stuff, the CIA just starts really getting more professional about how they launder money. They had problems in Iran-Contra affair. You should not have been reliant on bringing arms in and drugs out to pay for illegal arms trade. You need to have giant black markets somewhere else to facilitate these type of things. And that's what they learned from the Contra affair. So they set up BCCI, and they started a professional money laundering through charities and complexities, just like the Israelis do. And that is how Al Qaeda was created. That is how a number of horrible things were made, where they used BCCI gets shut down later in the 90s, but they just went back to Riggs Bank. But they start using regular banks, like they own banks now, so they don't have to. I mean, they had the in San Diego, but like they can use Riggs. Yeah,
that's a private banking, isn't it? Or it's it's. I mean, Ryan, there was a Riggs Bank in the U.S. Embassy in London. They had a branch inside the embassy in Grosvenor Square.
Yeah,
I mean, crazy. Yeah, that's where
Riggs Bank cut checks for Al Qaeda hijackers. Osama Bastan and Bayoumi through Banal and Duquette were getting money from Prince Turks bin Fasil, and Riggs processed checks, and the cash went to Nawif al-Hazmi and Khalid al-Mihdhar on Flight 77. And we know this, and it doesn't matter. Like everything I just said, that's like, wow, you mean Saudi Arabia state support for terrorists? Yeah. With the green light from Uncle Sam? Yeah. So, the media just doesn't, just like I just said here, Thane Caesar shot RFK. It's verifiable.
Yep.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
there's no more than him saying I did. I mean, you have the witnesses who saw him shooting his gun. He's right next to him. It matches the powder barn. He's in the right place. He works for the mob. God damn. And he pulled his tie off him even. I don't know. I don't know how you could prove it further other than a confession.
Just back to this document quickly, Ryan, because we
skipped over a bunch of witnesses too, because there's more. It's kind of overkill though. The ones that are important are Nina Hughes, because they changed her statement, so that shows LAPD complicity, and the CBS reporter, and John, because those are trained. They're not, because eyewitness, but Reporters are different. And they saw that. And you know whether you saw a gunshot or not saw a gunshot. Your memory's not that bad. He saw him firing. So that's a big one.
Can you hear me right now, Ryan?
Yes. No, I got you.
Yeah. Okay. Ryan, I'm going to bring this document back up on screen because we did talk about this. This is an important kind of crossover document when we're talking about the mob. This is with relation to the JFK files here. I know you're familiar with this document as well. Just explain to people what they're looking at here. This is
it looks like the Chicago field office.
Yes.
And I think you can go down to the bottom. There'll be a highlighted portion.
Yeah. Is this it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Now we have plenty of money. Our new backers are Jews. As soon as we or they take care of Kennedy, this is the day before the assassin. I think it's the day before, really close to it, of him being killed.
Yep.
So the report's on the 26th, but they're reporting about something that was said earlier. And I kind of alluded to this earlier. When they say Jews, they mean the Israelis.
Okay.
I mean, it's Jewish mob, but the Jewish mob is the Israelis.
Right. So this is
all those guys from the French Connection onward, like they all had state support. When Haganah was taking over Palestine, these are some of the people that procured a lot of the money. I have this NUMEC map on my back wall. It wasn't all from Rudolph Sonneborn and those guys. A lot of it was from like Hank Greenspun and Mo Dalitz and Mickey Cohen. Like they were pumping money in to the Stern Gang. And these are people from the Purple Gang, and their millions of dollars went to the terrorists that formed the state of Israel. And these are the people that were blowing up boats and hotels and blew up an embassy in Rome. And the Israeli Jewish agency that becomes the government, Ben Gurion, later Menachem Begin, and these people are all a bunch of terrorists that got financing from organized crime. And a lot of the illegal arms that ended up in Israel from Charlie Winters and these people, stolen from Nathan Liff, they stole some of that from the United States, some from Europe, and it would all go. There's a flow of weapons going to Palestine to back terrorists for the war in 1948. And a lot of money for the guns comes from organized crime. So, and these are the same people that are backing up these banks that I was just speaking of in Westgate, California, and blah, 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 running illegal gun traffic to Cuba, illegal gun traffic to Nicaragua with the Somozas. And it's a long story. A lot of that, though, it's all in the film I made, which you guys are going to show on Sunday, I guess. That will give you a good background on what was going on before they killed John Kennedy, and the conventional weapons flow, as well as this theft of uranium. These players that are in this film, you'll see Anastasia, Meyer Lansky, the same mob figures pop up and help finance the birth of the state of Israel.
And that's one of the big, I think, important conclusions that myself and many others, you of course, have made this connection with Israel and the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
With details too, like I'm naming names. And what they did and when they did it and paperwork. It's in there. And I probably should do a film on just Daley Plaza or a film on RFK, just the Ambassador Hotel, to show what was going on. And I will do that after I finish the one I'm working on now. Because the public is ready for this finally. The files are out and they need to know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of the criminals involved are dead. So they're not going to get punished. But people need to know what the Israeli state did to the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. The timing is, I think you're right, Ryan. The timing is good for this. I just have a little clip from NUMEC, which we'll play. This is from Ryan's film NUMEC, just a short brief clip here. We're going to play this.
Following the failed 1956 attack on Egypt, David Ben-Gurion sent his protege, Shimon Peres, the future prime minister of Israel, to Paris following the war, with the mission of acquiring nuclear technology from the French, which the Israelis themselves could not develop. They made a secret deal in 1957, where the French would provide Israel with nuclear technology and associated training. Covertly, Hiding in the Negev desert, the French built a plutonium-based nuclear plant in Dimona for the Israelis. It was supposed to be kept a secret, but American U-2 spy planes would spot the unaccounted for rig in the middle of the empty desert. Israel insisted it was nothing but an innocent textile plant. The United States demanded inspections of the site.
So that's what was actually going on at the time, Ryan. That's what was going on in the world. So you had a situation where Israel looking for, full support, full backing of the United States, but at the same time, almost engaged in high-level geopolitical nuclear blackmailing, basically.
Right.
Putting
John
it out
Kennedy
of
knew it. He knew he was getting jerked around. He'd worked very hard on a ban of nuclear weapons. He even had the French on board, and they didn't like that either. And if you notice, somebody tried to kill Charles de Gaulle twice, and that it's the same. They hired Corskins in that one, but like they tried to kill Charles de Gaulle, and they did kill Kennedy. But it was that important. Like, you are not going to freeze this. And they did get nuclear weapons. And Mordecai Vanunu later took pictures of the warheads. And then Glenn Maxwell's daddy told on him. And he's honored, just like Angleton's honored, by the heads of all the Israeli intelligence agencies. It was that important to them. There's letters, if you want to go read them, between Ben Gurion and John Kennedy back and forth. It's not going very well for Ben Gurion. And they're like, we're going to inspect Dimona. And Ben Gurion resigned to stall. And a month later, John was dead. So they didn't want to go. They didn't want to go nuclear, like for the pun, and kill the president unless they had to. They weren't going to kill Robert either. If he had not won the California primary and he wasn't going to become president, they would have left him alone. But because he was going to have power, they had to get rid of him. And they got rid of him that night. They were there. If he had lost, they would have walked away. Because he said, on to Chicago, let's win there. And then, no, you're not.
And what do you think his chances were? That was a big momentum shift, wasn't it? The California.
I mean, he just won the largest state in the union, so he was going to win. It's California wasn't always just a for sure Democrat state. I mean, Reagan won it; he was governor. It was,
right.
But it was a large state, and he had momentum. And they're like, "Look, who do we have in California? These guys. Okay, they'll take care of it." If he had gone to Chicago, they would have got him there. That would have been even easier. So
yeah.
Yep.
So Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, as he was known, Attorney General for his brother, President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1963. And his brother was in the ascendancy politically. He was a great, great crossover candidate for a lot of people, big civil rights lawyer and activist as well. So he had the black vote, he had the minority vote, he had the liberals. So he had a lot going for him, I think, going into
he had farmers too,
as well. Yep.
Mm-hmm. In agriculture. And I mean, he had a lot of great ideas. Very clever guy. It's really sad that it's sad in general, the caliber of people, even Nixon too, like just the intellectual level compared to now.
Yeah. Nixon, hugely underrated in terms of his presidency, and all his very formidable achievements are overshadowed by Watergate, right, which is a nothing burger compared to some of the scandals we've seen brushed under the rug in the last 4 or 5 years. Right. So it's incredible.
I would rather have the mob than now what we got. The crooks that are in now, that Pelosi generation, shameless, man. I can't think of a president other than Biden and Trump that would have allowed a genocide. And we know because Israel wanted to every time, and every prior president said no. Even George Bush Jr., the horrible, Iraq warmonger, all that, had his roadmaps of peace and made them get out of Gaza. Even Bush Jr. had more of a conscience. This is saying something. Bush and Cheney had more morals than Anthony Blinken and Harris, whoever's running the country when Biden was asleep.
And I grew up hating George Bush Sr.
Yeah.
And I grew up believing that he was behind the Kennedy assassination 100%. It was a Bush family plot to get rid of the Kennedys. And so little did I know that there was an assassination plot connected to Israeli intelligence to take out George Bush Sr. That's an interesting little piece of history we could get into another time.
George Bush was a Saudi guy. And yeah, I mean, he created the Safari Club. He's the one that brings the Saudis in 1976. He did a lot of damage when he was the head of the CIA. And in 1 year, he got so much done. And that is the formation of Al Qaeda. I mean, they bought boats together and stuff. He's very chummy with Bandar Bush, obviously. And so it'll bleed over into his son and the operations that Bush Sr. started and really got the roots for in Afghanistan that happened under Reagan presidency, but Bush was vice president by then. But he had set up the institutions already to do all the money laundering and finance the diaspora fighters, blah, blah, blah. This becomes the backbone of Al Qaeda and how they were financed at that point before they went back to rigs. But yeah, so he did a lot of damage, but his son is very pro-Israel. Bush Jr. is totally Zionist ankle grabber. And also had a relation with the Saudis. And these are the same factions you'll see again and again, involved in September 11th, involved in financing ISIS. This is GCC, Israel, and then you can add Turkey when you get to Syria. But it's the same factions and much more professional now than it was when they had to rely on just money from narcotics. They got so much money from opium and now fentanyl that they don't need to do petty things. They got quite a nest egg. And they need that because you can't go to Congress and say, oh, can I have $5 billion to finance ISIS? They're going to tell you no. They have to. So you have to find off the books methods of financing illegal activity. And now they have plenty.
Yes. It's back on screen here. We'll just bring this up. And, King, the first time I kind of put all of this together was about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It was, I met a Hollywood film producer named Howard Goldstein, who did a documentary film called King Kennedy. And it was all archival footage, no narration, all from National Archive, UCLA Film Archive. And he put together this story. It was so brilliantly cut. And I don't think he got any distribution on it, or it was viewed to be very controversial because of the implication of what I cannot remember. I saw the screening of it. It was in Soho Square, or I think Golden Square in Soho in London. And this would have been like it was been about 2000, 2001, around then. It's a long time ago. Sometime in the early 2000s, I can't remember, but he didn't release it. He couldn't get it released. I think it's still lingering, but this is it was his life project. He did a couple of other Hollywood films, but he put everything into this. This was like, he bet the farm on this documentary, and there were a lot of roadblocks to it. So I'm still trying to
accurate, probably.
Maybe
they killed Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy was only 2 months apart. Those were back to back, those killings, and they knew each other.
Yep.
Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover.
Could have been. Yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover is another common thread through these as well. We're not going to get into that rabbit hole, but
he supported inspecting Dimona until he didn't. It's almost like, he did an absolute 180 on his position, and we know why. Costello and Lansky know why.
The other thing I was going to ask you is in the JFK film by Oliver Stone, Clay Shaw was like this kind of main character. Clay Shaw connected to the mafia, but this is a bit of a cul-de-sac, isn't it? That's
Clay
not
Gertrude?
Just explain that point, because I think that's an important point, just not to forget, Ryan.
I haven't seen that film since high school or something, whenever I don't know. I watched it again. I think it came out when I was in middle school or so. I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while, but I remember even then just going, "Oh, they didn't say this. They didn't say this. They didn't say this." The executive producer of that film is Arnan Milchan, the largest arms dealer for Israel, smuggled in Krytron triggers, which are also used in the nuclear program. And so, yeah, from memory though, they kind of focused on that. They were like, well, Oswald on the back of this pamphlet had this address and it's adjacent to Guy Bannister and Shaw and Ferry in Louisiana. What's going on there? Ooh. And okay, that's all true, but that's not a very good breadcrumb, because they didn't talk about Clay Shaw and Timur Rosenbaum and Permidex. They didn't talk about Bannister or Ferry's links to Traficante, for example, like I went over a minute ago. All that is, everything with the mob is missing in that film, and everything with Israel. So they act like the government did it. It's the CIA. They're mad about Bay of Pigs. He fired Dulles. Not a stupid theory or anything. It's worth looking at, but I mean, when you look at the people who are at Daley Plaza, who Bill Decker released, it's not rocket surgery. And the same thing with RFK. What the classic like YouTube whatever about RFK is the woman in the polka dot dress who said, we got him, and they go down all these like red herrings. I think the guy that worked for the mob who was seen firing his gun, who was right behind him, is the one that did it. And here's why they did it. They bragged about it. I think we've got witnesses of a contract killing being made by the people that Robert Kennedy had investigated or thrown in jail, who had an axe to grind. I mean, John Kennedy too. That, I know a lot of people hated him, but if you want to know who shot him, that's not that hard to figure out. What's hard is getting people to care about why he was killed and who backed him up and who helped with the cover up. Shooting someone is easy. You could go out, hypothetically, you could go out and shoot someone right now. You wouldn't get away with it, but like you could do it. To get it covered up and to shoot and to kill a cop too, because they killed Officer Tippett, to get away with that takes a network. And that's what they had. And it also gave them leverage later with the Israelis. Like, look, we did you the biggest favor in the world twice. Nixon's going to be president. And he was. Who is almost about to lose to Kennedy again. Like would have grinded him to no end. But I have another show soon. So we'll do final questions or.
Yeah, just your final summation on Robert F. Kennedy assassination, Ryan. Your final thoughts on go ahead and wrap up your.
Just killed too young, and I feel for his family. His son lost a father, he lost an uncle. Later, he'd lose his wife to suicide. If either of the Kennedys had lived, we would not have any of the problems we have in the Middle East today. There never would have been an Iraq war. There never would have been a war in Syria. The CIA would have been gutted. Latin America would be different. It's hard to even get your head around how much better the world would be, how much things would have changed, especially in the Middle East, if these men had lived. And we wouldn't have had proliferation of nuclear weapons. The entire Cold War would have changed. Like everything fell apart when John got shot. And then when we had a chance to fix it, they shot Bobby too. And that was it. They were the last people to ever tackle those toxic topics. And so now we have a president that's bombing Yemen and is probably going to be led into a stupid war with Iran. Kennedys would have never done that. They're not perfect. They did some stupid things, but the direction of the United States, which affects the whole planet, would have been completely different and in a positive direction. Martin Luther King too. I mean, obviously he had his problems too with his adultery and his plagiarism, whatever, but he was definitely a net positive, huge for the civil rights movement. And who knows what he could have been and inspired had he lived. And they know this too. They know if they're not going to assassinate someone who doesn't matter. They come after you because they know you matter. You're a threat to the system. And all three of these men were a huge threat to organized crime, the CIA, which to me is organized crime with the Kennedys, especially. And, you know, Black community and others were listening to Martin Luther King. They didn't want to be in Vietnam. Those struggles were important. And here's someone that wouldn't be the boogeyman they wanted him to be. He had passive resistance. He, of course, they killed Malcolm too, but he was a threat to the system, and they wanted him out. And they didn't like that style. And it was a signal to everyone else. Don't ever replicate this, or you'll end up like him. You'll end up like Kennedy. You'll end up like Martin. But people have continued to speak out. We've had, in our generation, the Snowdens and Assanges who paid the price, exile, jail. But was it worth it? I mean, so Assange comes out and says, yeah, the NSA, or the Snowden too, the NSA shares everything with the Israelis. Gets a lot of heat, no political changes happen. Assange is talking about the civilians murdered in Iraq and things we all know, but there's no consequences for it. Instead, they go after the whistleblower instead of the criminals, which lets you know we're run by criminals. And we're run by criminals. Largely, it started by killing John F. Kennedy and installing Lyndon Johnson. We hadn't had a crook that large since Lincoln. And I'm talking about the real Lincoln, not the fairy tale one that people think freed the slaves on. I'm talking about the actual Lincoln.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Ryan. It's amazing. It's amazing. And you know, some countries have a policy of decapitating leaders. So there's always chaos, disarray, you know, problems with continuity of policy, and ultimately making them more vulnerable to outside influence. And
that wouldn't have happened either. All those leader decapitations in Latin America, that wouldn't have happened under Bobby Kennedy, most likely.
Yeah.
Johnson and Nixon, they all let him, they did it all. They all did it. Yom Kippur, the 6 Day War wouldn't have happened. The 6 Day War would never have happened if it wasn't LBJ. That whole annexation and the whole problem with Palestine, like that would have been gone.
Different world.
I have like time machine fantasies to help JFK. Like if you,
yeah, you need a TARDIS. Get your own sort of phone box like Doctor Who, and find out what experience, even to experience it for a couple of weeks, what the world would have been like without the constant turmoil, the death and destruction, especially in that part of the world that has not been.
JFK really just made a decision like, I'm going to splinter these groups. Like after Bay of Pigs, it wasn't about air support or whatever. It's just like, you lied to me about ground support. You lied about everything. He'd already fired Dulles and some of the others. And then a great reform was on its way. It was coming. He was going to break them into 1,000 pieces. He's still strong against communism and all that. He wasn't soft, but he understood. He called it a government within a government. Kennedy had figured it out. He figured out where the shadow government was. Now it's morphed in. It's even deeper. It's horrible, but just Doge, like cutting people off Social Security who are over 120 years old and they're setting Teslas on fire. Like this is a reaction to cutting waste. And I mean, you and I kind of agree on Elon, but that is something like, okay, we can cut money to 135-year-olds because they don't exist. And they're setting Tesla factories on fire. Violence. I mean, they're reacting to, oh, you're going to get rid of our slush fund, then we'll physically attack you. He better watch out too. Elon might catch a bullet one day. Just from the perception of him cutting waste, we'll do it.
Yeah. Well, politics is a dirty, tricky, dangerous game, and one must be aware of the different spheres of politics, I think, and it doesn't matter how much money you have to be aware of.
We saw it in Slovakia recently, and there are still attempted assassinations of political leaders. Like that is still a viable way, even if it's from the outside. Like they talk about decapitation strikes. I think I said this on one of your shows before, but I am very suspicious about that helicopter drop of the Iranian president. Like I don't know yet, but
for sure,
all the circumstantial evidence is there. The motives are there. So
Raisi.
it's worth looking at.
President Raisi. Yeah.
Yeah, Raisi.
Yeah. Ryan Dawson, again, at Rye Liberty on X. That's Ryan's handle on the bottom there. And again, we'll put up the film Numek, How Israel Stole the Bomb and Killed JFK. That's up at 21st Century Watch Sunday screening, also up on Rumble for free. Watch that film, share it with everybody you know. I think everybody needs to have that information. Very, very important. And
We've
also,
got it subtitled in Arabic too, if you need that, but English and Arabic.
That's very important to have it subtitled in Arabic, actually. And here's your website, the Anti-Neocon Report. That's where you can visit Ryan, see his books, his films. There's all sorts of information, merchandise as well. There's links to that there. Plus,
yeah, that film tab. There's a bunch of free movies in there on Syria, on everything. Like, just check that out if you're bored and you want to even just listen to it in the background. Because you can kind of listen to films, but I'd rather you watch it because I am putting documents on the screen to prove what I'm saying. But watch Numek, watch Trump's Zionist Ball and Chain. That's a big one. Watch The Invisible Hand on Syria. Those films, they're all free. There's a couple paid wall, but almost all of them are free. There's a great one called Why is Africa Poor? That goes over transfer pricing and some of the shenanigans, economic shenanigans in Zambia, and I took other case examples, but that's important too because it shows you the structure and how they just railroad people, and that's got a lot with Mark Rich and Pincus Green and Glencore and some of these commodities tyrants. Which is, I didn't explain this, but when I was talking about Permadex, it's almost identical model. What they did in Glencore is the same thing.
Yeah, they're really knee deep in neck deep in oil in the Middle East, ISIS, all of these sort of things. Yeah.
And copper and yeah. Yep.
Interesting. Well, there's something to segue onto in the future. But thank you for joining us, Ryan, and taking time out of your very busy schedule because this story's dropped. You're very busy because you've
Thank you. It's cathartic to get this off, out to people, and I'm middle of the brothel gate, that's another interesting thing I'm digging into. So maybe we'll touch back on that on Spaces or something. So really appreciate it. I do got a heart out, but this is great. It's great to talk about the Kennedys. I'm glad. I wish I could have had this story out 15, 20 years ago, but I just didn't have any reach back then.
Yeah. Well, it's still relevant, still important. It's good to know your history. We don't know where we're going unless we know where we came from. How we got here in the first place. There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Ryan Dawson, independent journalist, filmmaker, and researcher.